evening programs invite us to reflect on these variations, how experiences is interpreted, nurtured, questioned, and lived in both in the three monotheistic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Our first speaker, Professor Leaman, is a professor of philosophy at the University of Kentucky and an international respected scholar in Jewish, Islamic, and Asian philosophy. He will address the curious shift in Jewish tradition from a scriptural emphasis on religious experience to a broader focus on law, prayer, and ethical life. What has caused this transition, and does it pose any challenges to the Jewish spirituality? Okay, can I ask everybody please to mute your microphone before you come in, okay, as soon as you come in. Thank you very much. Right, so of course, the second speaker, of course, is Professor Harry Huebner, Professor Emeritus at the Canadian Mennonite University, bringing the Christian perspective into the conversation in a faith tradition rooted in the miraculous life of Jesus and the transformative call of conversion. Professor Huebner will explore both the extraordinary and the everyday encounters with the divine that shapes Christian life and ethics. Our third speaker, of course, will be Hujjatul Islam, Dr. Mohammad Ali Shomali, is a leading Islamic scholar and philosopher whose work spans decades of scholarship in interfaith engagement. Drawing from Quranic and Shia sources, Dr. Shomali will take us into the rich terrain of Islamic spirituality, highlighting the personal and communal dimension of religious experience, from prayer and contemplation to the transformative remembrance of God. Each speaker brings profound insight, experience, and warmth to the table. We hope that tonight's discussion will not only illuminate the distinct spiritual sensibilities within each tradition, but also open pathway for shared understanding and reflection. As we begin, it is important to bear in mind that no single speaker can represent the full diversity of an entire religious tradition. The perspective we hear tonight are thoughtful and scholarly expression from within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, each offering a distinctive window into how religious experience is understood and lived. To help the framework of the discussion historically, we will follow the chronological order in which the Abrahamic faith emerged, beginning with Judaism, followed by Christianity, and concluding with Islam. Speakers have 30 minutes each to deliver their presentation. This will be followed by the final 30 minutes Q&A session. So, without further ado, I give the microphone to Professor Oliver Leaman.
Thank you very much, Amir, and good evening or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you're listening from. I'm just going to make a few remarks about Judaism and the concept of religious experience. And I suppose we ought to start off first by talking about what experience is. I mean, what is experience? And the experience, I suppose, of feelings, emotions, something that's very close to us, something that we can't really argue about. What makes an experience religious? That's a harder question. How do we know, for example, that an experience is really one in which God is involved? I mean, how do we know this? Which people should we believe when they say that their experiences are religious? What are the criteria of accuracy here? That's something, when somebody sits down next to us on the underground and tells us that last night God gave them a message, we tend to be skeptical, because it's very easy to think that God's talking to you, or that you're having a religious experience and perhaps you're not. So I think that skepticism is there in all the religions. In all the religions, nobody asks for blind faith in a particular experience being genuine. All experiences are supposed to be based on evidence, on argument, on various things happening. So in the Jewish Bible, for example, we have prophets who have experiences. God talks to them. There are miracles sometimes, extraordinary things happen. God makes predictions which turn out to be true. God makes promises, God has a contract with the Jewish people and with humanity in some cases. So these are all based on religious experiences. You know, in the Bible, we have a whole account of God's relationship with Israel and the children of Israel and with other people, and experience is important in the Bible. After the Bible, though, after the Bible, what account is there of experience in Judaism, in ordinary Judaism? What experiences of which could be called religious do ordinary Jews today have, for example? Because we are far from the period of prophecy. You know, God does not prophesy. There are no prophets anymore after the Bible, according to Judaism. And so what are the experiences? How important is experience? And in Judaism, what has replaced experience in very much is law. So for many Jews, they have their religious duties, they have their religious law, they have their religious rituals and practices, but they don't necessarily have any experiences which go with this, because they just have to carry out their duties. But you don't have, so for example, you may be the father of a child and you may carry out your duty as a father, but you may have no particular liking for your child, or you may not approve of what your child is doing, but you have your duty. There are things you're supposed to do. And sometimes, of course, in most cases, we love our children. We have all sorts of experiences with them, but we don't have to. You know, we can just be involved in carrying out our normal activities without having any particular experience at all. And that's a very common phenomenon in religious life when religions are based on law. Religions which are based on law, as traditional Judaism is, are religions which have a detailed set of rules and regulations for people to follow. They have extensive prayers and rituals for people to observe. But there are no particular experiences that have to go with it. I mean, let me give you an example. Jews are supposed to rejoice every week on the Shabbat, on the Sabbath. So on the Sabbath, Friday night to Saturday night, Jews are supposed to celebrate basically the creation of the world and their relationship with God, which is what the Sabbath is supposed to represent. When God had finished creating the world and he rested. Jews rest and they praise God and they pray to God and thank him for what he's done. And they're supposed to be cheerful. So, for example, there are no funerals. Well, in emergencies, anything can happen. But if somebody is in a mourning period, for example, after a death, it's suspended over the Sabbath. You know, you're not supposed to be sad on the Sabbath. You're supposed to rejoice. And there are some festivals like that as well. In the Torah, it says they should rejoice. But I think on all the festivals, Jews are supposed to rejoice. But what does that actually mean? Does it mean you're supposed to have particular experiences? I mean, what is the experience of rejoicing? It's very unclear how far experience is important here. So I wanted to mention that to start off with, that this concept of religious experience is really quite a vague one, and it's difficult to really specify what sort of experiences a believer is supposed to have. Traditional Jews tend to relate to God through the law. They don't relate to God on a person-by-person basis. I mean, this has often been the complaint by Christians against Judaism, that, in refusing to accept Jesus, Jews can't accept the idea of the incarnation of God coming down to the world, later than is specified in the Torah. And law seems to be a rather boring thing to rest a religion on, compared to perhaps having a personal relationship with the Creator through his son, Jesus Christ, or through somebody else. So I sort of mentioned that at the outset. I think the Jews are quite suspicious, traditional Jews are quite suspicious of the idea of religious experience. And again, those issues I mentioned at the beginning would all come in. How do you know it's genuine? How do you know God's really talking to you? How do you know it's God? I mean, it could be all sorts of things which you're confusing with God, perhaps. Then, of course, there are Jews who are not religious, but who are still Jews. Of course, Jews are not a religious group, they're a race. So there are Jews, most Jews in the United States, for example, do not belong to a synagogue or a temple. Most Jews in the United States are very secular. I mean, they're Jews, but they don't go to pray. They don't pray. They don't keep kosher. They wouldn't know a Jewish law if you hit them on the head with it. I mean, they know nothing about the laws, but they're still Jews, and they do things. I mean, for example, a lot of Jews in America are very keen on the notion in Hebrew of tikkun olam, of repairing the world. And they're involved in charity, or they're involved in, helping people, or they're involved in trying to improve the environment. That's what they see their Jewish life and their Jewish mission as being. They may well not believe in God, but they still would regard themselves as Jews because they haven't joined another religion, and ethnically they are Jews. So there are these two lots, and of course within these two groups there are also other groups who do seek a personal relationship with God. There are Jews who are interested in mysticism, who are interested in Kabbalah, for example, who are interested in trying to establish a close relationship with God on a person-to-person level by a variety of means. Things which will be quite familiar to Muslims through Sufism, for example, which had a considerable impact on Judaism in the medieval period. So but this is very much a minority. Very few Jews. I mean, this really is a tiny minority, an important minority, but very small. Most Jews see the period of personal religious experience as being in the past. It's not. And even some of the most successful prophets, I mean, who was the most successful prophet in the Torah? I mean, I suppose it was Jonah. I mean, Jonah wandered around Nineveh and said, in 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed. That's all he said, very uninterested in doing it. He ran away from God. He did everything he could not to do what God wanted him to do. And when the Ninevites all repented and were saved, he was miserable. God, he didn't think he'd done a good job. He was very sorry that his prophecy had worked. He was a very successful prophet, but he wasn't interested in personal experience, personal religious experience. He ran away from it. As we know, he was rescued by the fish. And later on, I mean, when God talks to him, Jonah's very rude and dismissive, constantly. He wasn't really interested in the personal experience with God. I mean, other prophets like Moses obviously were. But the prophets and in the Bible, the Israelites had a personal experience with God in the desert, but they were constantly turning against him. They constantly argued with God, and they said, why are these terrible things happening to us? And of course, they built the golden calf when Moses was spent a bit too long up Mount Sinai. So, we shouldn't assume that people in a religion are particularly interested in having a personal experience or a religious experience. You'd have thought, well, surely there can be nothing more important than a religious experience. But for most people, there are many more important things, like earning a living, eating, having friends, going to movies, reading books. I mean, religious experience, however it's defined, may well seem to be unattainable, not something for ordinary people, not something that we should really be concerned about. Because we have, for traditional Jews, we have the law. I mean, the law is a way of carrying out duties and obligations to God, which involve a great deal of thought and consideration. And you have to study the law to know that you're doing the right thing. It's not a matter of sitting down and waiting for an experience to come to you. You have to read books, and you have to discuss those books, and you have to get involved in a practice involving prayer, and what you wear, and what you say, and how you behave, and how you develop over time. Religious Jews are typically very busy because, as well as their other activities, perhaps to earn a living, they're also praying and studying and discussing legal and religious issues. But none of that involves religious experience. Perhaps it should. Perhaps that's why Judaism is such a small religion, whereas the other two Abrahamic religions are much bigger and much more popular. Perhaps that's not something which is attractive to many people. And that is that's something we might, we might want to discuss at some point. Even Jews who are not religious, but who follow a system like Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Again, there's no religious experience there, really. I mean, they may feel satisfied that they're doing what they think they ought to be doing, or what they think God wants them to do. But I don't think there's any religious experience there. There's not, God spoke to me and told me to do X, is not something that is typically said by Jews in the modern time. I mean, certainly in biblical times, But now it's not something which people often say, despite what impressions one might get from watching Fiddler on the Roof or those sorts of dramas. So I don't want to sort of disparage the role of religious experience in Judaism, because for some Jews, no doubt it's important, but really, I think for, pretty small minority. And for most Jews, other things are more important. Politics, law, prayer, those things are important, but they don't necessarily go along with particular experiences. Now, I'd like to say something about another aspect of this issue, which I personally find interesting, and that's the issue not so much of Jewish views of religious experience, but what are the experiences of being a religious person in Judaism in particular? What is it to be a religious person, a religious Jew? What do they feel like? What do they feel like? Because they often wear strange clothes compared with most people. They often speak a language which other people don't on the whole speak. They have a very restricted lifestyle in terms of what they eat and what they drink and what they're supposed to say. They have quite a different lifestyle from many people in a secular society, because they spend a lot of time praying and doing things related to their role as religious Jews. What does it feel like? We don't really know. I mean, we don't really know what it feels like. For example, to be wearing very inappropriate clothes on a very hot day. I mean, if you go to Jerusalem, for example, when it's not under attack, you'll see all these guys wearing fur hats, heavy wool coats, thick leather boots, in very hot conditions. What does it feel like to wear the wrong clothes? I mean, for them, it's not the wrong clothes. And these are the traditional clothes of the particular type of religious Jew that they might be. Of course, some religious Jews don't wear any special clothes at all, but some do. Even religious Jews that don't wear special clothes, I mean, they live a very different lifestyle from everybody else. They can't eat anything, just anything at all. It has to be, kosher. And they can't drink anything. They can't say anything. They have to, follow a code of ethics, which is very much different from, they can't do the things that most people can do. What does it feel like? What experiences do religious Jews have? And how far are they different from the experiences that ordinary people have? And I think this is a question for all the religions here, because, many of us live in societies which are predominantly secular, where people, eat anything, drink anything, don't pray, aren't interested in spiritual issues. And what is it to experience living in that society if you don't share the beliefs of most people in that society? So, for example, when you're last week in London, it was Ascot. And Ascot Week are a series of races, horse races. And to go, you have to dress up. If you're a woman, you have to wear a hat to go into certain parts of the enclosure. And if you're a man, you have to wear a top hat, you have to wear a jacket, you have to wear a, you know, it's quite uncomfortable. What is it to feel that you're wearing the wrong clothes, given the weather, but you're wearing the right clothes, given what you regard your mission as being, i.e. going to Ascot? I mean, that's a non-religious way of putting the issue. But a lot of people who are wearing clothes in which they're uncomfortable, they feel that they're pleasing God. They're doing what God wants them to do, perhaps. They're obeying what they see are God's wishes. They are following the rules of modesty and propriety, which they see as having been set out by God. And I think that's an experience, having that feeling. That is indeed a feeling. Whether it's a religious feeling, it's a feeling about religion. Whether it's a religious feeling, I'm not sure, because perhaps it's a feeling where you're trying to test yourself. You're trying to see whether you can manage to wear something which is really not appropriate for a particular situation, but which is the ritual equipment for as far as your religion is concerned. And I would just mention here, I'm going to stop on this point, that we shouldn't think, I mean, the Quran often talks about how God has made religion easy for us, but a lot of people like religion to be difficult. I'm told in the United States now that the various Eastern Orthodox churches have become quite popular, and they have very long services during which you have to stand up all the time, apparently. Some people like a religion to be difficult. They like it to be all-engrossing. They like it to take over their lives. They like it to, get into every aspect of their existence. But even so, is there a particular experience that's involved? Or is this an emotional attitude which doesn't really impinge on experience? So those are the issues which I thought I would mention. I think I've spoken for almost 30 minutes. So I think now would be a good time for me to finish. And I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say. And at the end of the session, no doubt there will be an opportunity for us all to talk amongst each other. So thank you very much, and I'm going to finish there.
Thank you very much to you, Professor Leaman, and obviously you always leave us with many questions to be formulated for you. Right, okay, so without further ado, we will ask our next speaker, Professor Huebner. I think your microphone is already, yes, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. And it sounds like we are off to a good start. Thank you, Professor Leaman, for your words. I want to greet you all with words that Jesus spoke on several occasions when he said, "Peace be with you." I also bring greetings from the Christian church in general, which, as we know, is very diverse and has many opinions on most matters, and different opinions on most matters. The Mennonite church, in particular, which I am part of, and Canadian Mennonite University in Winnipeg, where I've taught for many years. I'm honored to be part of this interfaith dialogue. I've been involved in many such events, most often in Iran with Shia scholars from Qom. It is my conviction that understanding and friendship among the adherents of the Abrahamic faiths are the desire of God and are important conditions for peace in this world. It is also my prayer that to that end, God might bless our time together here today. It's also my deepest prayer that the violence in many places of this world, and today most particularly in the Middle East, may end. I pray for the healing of the nations. In the Christian faith, religious experiences are not unusual phenomena. In fact, they are common and ordinary. Like other faiths, Christianity is born in divine encounter. Consider the examples: the miraculous birth of Jesus, the many miracles of Jesus, his death and resurrection, and his ascension. And indeed, in the early church too, we have such events. For example, the experience of Pentecost, told in the Bible's book of Acts, chapter 2. Here, the presence of God in the form of the Holy Spirit appears as tiny flames of fire, giving understanding and friendship to profoundly different people. A single language was spoken, yet people from different nations all heard the message in their own language. This was the birth of the church, that body that is called to bring together profoundly different human beings and grow them into a united community. In some ways, this was and is an ordinary event, but in other ways, it was and is highly transformative and revolutionary. Religious experiences all involve awe and reverence at the profound sense of God's presence. These are often very common occurrences, such as walking among beautiful scenery, or praying for healing and receiving healing, or in silent meditation. Religious experiences can also be profound disruptions from the ordinary, surprises and unanticipated encounters. Today, I wish to speak briefly about both of these kinds of experience. First, the extraordinary of such experiences, and second, the ordinariness of divine presence. So first, the extraordinary. In addition to the Pentecost story in the early church, there are other such stories in the biblical book of Acts, including the story of the conversion of Paul the apostle. Paul, or Saul as he was first called, was a Pharisee and a zealous persecutor of the early followers of Jesus. One day, as he was traveling to Damascus to hunt Jesus followers in order to arrest and prosecute them, he was suddenly confronted by a very bright light and a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" The voice self-identified as the voice of Jesus, who had already ascended into heaven. After this encounter, he was blinded for 3 days. He was taken to Damascus, and there he was healed of his blindness by a disciple of Jesus, his enemy, remember, named Ananias. Paul became a disciple and was baptized by Ananias. His life changed in a radical way. Even his name changed from Saul to Paul. He subsequently dedicated his life to spreading the peace message of Jesus, making many missionary journeys throughout the Roman Empire. Another story of a deeply religious experience comes from the early church and the martyrdom of Polycarp in 155 CE. His was one of the earliest accounts of Christian martyrs. He was the Bishop of Smyrna and died at the age of 86. Briefly, the story goes as follows. He was arrested at his farmhouse for being Christian. He was brought before a Roman magistrate and asked to denounce his faith. His familiar response was as follows: 86 years I have been his servant, and he has done me no injury. How can I blaspheme my King and Savior? He was condemned to death and sentenced to be burned at the stake. When Polycarp was placed into the fire, an amazing thing happened. He did not burn, nor was he hurt from the fire. This puzzled his persecutors, of course, and so they summoned an executioner to plunge him with a dagger. When this occurred, a dove, that eternal symbol of peace, flew from his wound, and so much blood gushed out that it extinguished the flames. Nevertheless, Polycarp died. But before he died, he offered this prayer: I give you thanks, O God, that you have counted me worthy on this day and this hour, that I would have a part to the number of your martyrs and in the cup of Christ, to the resurrection of eternal life. The prayer goes on, but it is clear that the divine events highlighted here are not the unusual things surrounding his torture, like the fire or the not burning him or the dove coming from his wound. But the thing that is identified here is the presence of God empowering him to remain faithful in his agony. There are many accounts of martyrdom in the Christian story where supernatural experiences are recounted. And the significance is always that the martyr kept the faith and did not recant nor resort to violence against the persecutors. In my own tradition, which goes back to the 16th century Reformation and the Anabaptist Christians, there are many accounts of their torture and death because they did not accept the faith of mainline Christianity. In many cases, these were Christians killing Christians. Indeed, a very big book called The Martyr's Mirror has been compiled with such stories. Some stories involve great dramatic flair, and in many cases, the individual's agony is not even made public. But the miracle that usually surrounds or gets named in these stories is the faithfulness of the martyrs. God became present to them in their darkest hour, and they did not capitulate to either denial of their faith or to violence. That was the miracle, or the miracle named, because this is what God empowered them to do. Even today, my people are encouraged to read The Martyr's Mirror, which is obviously not that uplifting a read. In fact, the youth are today sometimes given this book as birthday gifts or Christmas gifts to serve as the reminder of God's presence and power to help us keep the faith in adverse times. There are today literally countless examples of extraordinary events like voices, visions, near-death experiences, and so on. In William James's famous book, The Variety of Religious Experience, which came out in 1902, he places these accounts in 4 types: mysticism, conversion, prayer, and visions. Now, philosophers and psychologists have analyzed these events, and one of their prime concerns is, of course, the truth of such claims. Obvious, valid concerns for scholars and academics. That is, whatever they are, or whether they are really examples of God acting or not. They may just be accounted for in other ways, perhaps through psychology or neurology or other scientific approaches. That is, authentication and verification are the primary concerns here. The suggestion being that if there is no ordinary language for these events, then they are religious, that is of God. But if there is an ordinary accounting available, then they are not. But this approach itself is problematic, since why cannot ordinary accounts of events hold divine presence? For Christians, religious language is a given, and as such, the question is not whether, but how we best speak of divine presence. We all know that in a world where there is no religious language, there can be no religious experience. Christian theology has as one of its tasks to give an accounting of divine activity in an ordinary world. And this leads me now to the second part of my presentation, the ordinariness of the extraordinary. And I begin here with a personal and very ordinary example. I am, in my retirement, a gardener. I do everything I can to grow healthy fruits and vegetables. And every year I am filled with wonder and awe at what happens. I water, fertilize, keep the weeds and bugs at bay, but I cannot make my plants grow. They grow by another power. I do not consider this special divine intervention just for me, but I do consider the power of growth a gift from beyond to me and to the entire world. We might say that this is just natural, and it is natural, but where from the natural? We are told by scientists that the natural began some 14 billion years ago in what was called the Big Bang. Obviously, we had nothing to do with that. We live within its effects and receive it as gift. Its understanding remains, at least in part, however, a mystery. Reality is complex, and the apparent is not always real, and the real is not always apparent. But the natural, too, is God's gift to us. It is hard to acknowledge that God is in charge of this world, and we are not. And there are different ways of explaining this, however. In 18th century deism, their account of reality suggests that God's work was completed after creation. And today we see this wonder unfolding according to a given structure and set of rules. Deism suggests that God does not intervene in the natural functioning of things. On this view, a religious experience might be in the wonder of creation, that is, what God has done, but not on what God is doing. And indeed, there are many Christians today who subscribe to this view, and there are also other views, however, where divine encounter is much more immediate. The Christian faith has at its core a radical claim, namely that the sharp barrier between the divine and the human is porous. Indeed, the person of Jesus embodies the fusion of the divine and human. This implies that the possibilities on earth are far greater than can be humanly imagined. This claim, of course, is much debated in the history of thought, and it takes many different forms. In Western philosophy, for example, it even takes related issues like the universal particular debate in Greek philosophy, or the phenomena noumena debate in Immanuel Kant, or the dialectic of the ideal and the real within Hegel. These are all in some version related to this claim about ultimate reality and penultimate reality, or what we experience empirically. And while this can be discussed in complicated philosophical and scientific language, at another level, it is not that complicated. I appreciate the 13th century Sufi mystic, Rumi, who has made the following highly insightful comment. He says, "Each moment contains 100 messages from God." Rumi believed that the human relationship with God was an active relationship, and so the religious life is an everyday and ongoing experience with the divine, and it is our task to learn how to listen. This sounds very much like the basic tenet of the Christian faith. Indeed, one might change it slightly to say, each moment in life contains within it a myriad of divine activities. Ours is the task to train ourselves to receive them as gift. This, in fact, may well be the punchline of the Christian life. This view of God and the world has specific implications. It means that reality is far more complex than one language can exhaust. And while a given accounting can be very helpful, it cannot claim the right to determine for everyone how one must speak about or understand the world. To do so might be called epistemological violence. That is, it forces another into a single understanding of reality. This temptation is crucial to seeing the science-religion controversy in proper perspective. It is also important for interfaith dialogue. Difference should be respected and interrogated with empathy instead of imposed on the other with arrogance. The working of God on earth cannot be grasped through a single lens. Christians speak of experiencing God's presence in a variety of ordinary ways. Many people come to the Christian faith through conversion. Few are as dramatic as Paul's experience. Nevertheless, they are specifically marked events where people sense God's presence. They speak of an inner awareness of serenity and peace, of release from the burdens of the past, especially sins, a new resolve to live life better. This can be profound and radical or quite ordinary. To the North American evangelical tradition, it is often referred to as being born again, borrowing the biblical language of Jesus when he spoke of the turnaround necessary to becoming a disciple. In many such experiences, there is a profound transformation of the person. Perhaps the most common form of religious experience for Christians is worship, which includes singing and prayer. At the beginning of most worship services, God's Spirit is invoked. The expectation is that God will be present. In fact, Christians believe that God is present everywhere long before we are. So the invocation is not so much an invitation for God to become present to us as it is for us to become present before God. Worship is normally a group event bringing together the desires of the mind, heart, and spirit. That is, becoming open to God's transformative power of renewal and hope. Specific rituals and practices are performed to draw worshipers into this hope. Some of these are called sacraments. A sacrament is an ordinary event with an extraordinary meaning and possible outcome. Two common examples are baptism and marriage, which are usually one-time occurrences for individuals. A sacrament is an outward visible sign of God's grace, which may not be immediately visible. In other words, there is much more happening than participants in these events are aware of, so it requires an openness to divine human encounter. In these acts, both the administrant of the ritual and God are seen as agents. In baptism, we are asking God to initiate the person into the church, that is the body of Christ. And in marriage, we are inviting God to join together two people in holy matrimony, to bless them and to help them or to hold them in God's care. Another common sacrament is Holy Communion or Eucharist, as it is called in some churches. And it is repeated over and over. That is, it is not a one-time event like some others. In some churches, communion is practiced every Sunday. The liturgy is about placing ourselves into the Lord's Supper and seeking renewal through forgiveness of sin, both personal and communal sins. It is a vicarious participation in the death and resurrection of Christ, placing our burdens into the suffering of Christ and claiming their overcoming in the resurrection. There are many finer interpretations and indeed different details of these rituals by different churches, but a sacrament seeks to open individuals and the entire community to God's redemptive action. In conclusion, I want to highlight the religious experience of the encounter with the other, either through reconciliation or simply the beauty of friendship. Of course, these are very ordinary experiences, but they are also highly transformative and with dynamics and dimensions that can be extraordinary. One of Jesus's primary teachings was to love one another. He embraced the so-called great commandment of his tradition, namely to love God and to love neighbor. And in his teaching, he frequently chided his audience for failing to love the other. After all, the other too is a creation of God and so is sacred, holding the potential for one to encounter the divine in the other. So in the Good Samaritan parable found in the Gospel of Luke chapter 10, Jesus highlights the Samaritan, who himself is the other for the people Jesus was addressing. What is special about him? He was compassionate, and he had showed compassion and does the work of God's compassion in loving the stranger. And so becomes a model for the insiders. He offers the gift of healing to the victim of robbery and treats him as a child of God. The power of love helps us to see how it can itself be the ground of divine experience. When God is love, as the gospel writer of John declares, participating in love is participating in God. And this calls for permitting the other to be the other. Sorry, what happened? Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can. Please
Okay.
carry on. Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm just finishing up. Yeah, and this calls for permitting the other to be the other, that is, different, respected, appreciated, and befriended. Jesus radicalizes his teaching to include even love of enemy. Loving the enemy is perhaps the most difficult of Jesus's teaching, and yet it is but an extension of his teaching that the other too is a gift from God. Reconciliation with enemies can be seen as the culmination of God's will for humankind to live in unity. It is divine activity. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2, speaks of this in a direct manner. He names the work of God as breaking down the dividing walls of hostility between those who are estranged. In this work, creating one united, peaceful humanity, God and humans collaborate. And this requires trust, faith, and imagination, especially the ability to see beyond the ordinary options available. It requires the belief that God is at work healing our brokenness and blessing our efforts to make peace. In a world of modern Western secular liberalism, the posture of openness to God's healing work is not easy. The thought structures and the language are not readily available. So it calls for a reimagining. willing to dismantle the acquiescence to the givenness of hatred and violence, and to replace it with an imagination open to participating in God's love and restorative peace. The Christian challenge is to learn to be in love with wonder and mystery, and to be bold enough to participate in it. For a divine experience is not only what God does as an independent agent, but also what God does through and with human participation. And that can only occur when we are open to the remarkable, to possibilities not fully visible at the time, not with a blindness to rationality and empirical sense-making, but with the hope that in the apparent hopelessness of any situation and the given human yearning to move beyond, there is still real hope. There is hope because what we see is not all there is. We did not command the universe and its mysteries into existence. God did. And ultimately, we are not in charge. God is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Huebner, for your presentation, and I'm sure you will have many questions after this. I think it's now the time of Sheikh Shomali. Oh, thank you, Sheikh Shomali, for coming timely. You have the microphone, and you can come in straight away. We made the announcement. For any of you who wants to again read the biography of each speaker, our website will have more details of that. Thank you very much, Dr. Shomali. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, I thank God for being able to be with you in this beneficial exchange. I thank Professor Harry Huebner and Professor Leaman for their informative presentations. We had wonderful programs in Kenya, and in the middle of our presence there, the attack on Iran started, and I was not sure where I will be. So on Saturday at midnight, we left Nairobi via Turkey and then by road, by plane. So thanks to God, last night we arrived calm with some colleagues, and up to today morning, and we didn't have internet, but now internet for outside Iran is working. So everything is in hands of God, and more than ever, we are committed to working for dialogue and for peace. So, in the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, I will have, God willing, a very brief presentation of on religious experience. And I would like first to mention what I mean in my presentation by religious experience, because normally in philosophy of religion, when they refer to religious experience, they may use it as something that can intellectual arguments for religious claims, especially for existence of God. And some people have tried to use this as a way to argue for existence of God without being able or without being in need of having, any rational proof. And some people also then tried this concept of religious experience to define revelation, prophetic revelation, as a kind of experience that a prophet may have with God, and then he will share it with other people. So my usage of religious experience in this presentation is not necessarily like that. my usage, I think my colleagues also maybe perhaps used it in this way, is that a kind of deep experience that is not something that non-religious people can have. If there is a kind of joy, is a kind of only hope, or a kind of, I don't know, sadness, a kind of seriousness and habit, then I don't think that is religious experience. In my understanding, it's a type of experience that only a believer in God can have. It's a kind of encounter with the ultimate reality that brings, on the one hand, humility and awe to you, and on the other hand, opens the eyes of your heart to a great reality. And between you and this great reality, depending on the depths of this experience, the distance becomes closer, becomes less and less, and you become closer and closer, and it can reach the point that there would be no veil between you and God. So it's in this sense that I'm going to use religious experience, although it has different degrees, it has different levels, but this is something that if you don't have it, it's very, much sign of not being really making progress in your religious life. If your religious life is a matter of just having physical actions or certain doctrines, memorized and, accepted or declared or professed, it's not enough. So we can discuss it in 3 levels. One is something for ordinary believers who are trying to live a life of piety and alertness and spirituality. This is making them available to have some level of religious experience. And then when it comes to the people who have devoted their lives to God and to bring light to themselves and others, it's a higher level of religious experience. And when it comes to the prophets, it's the highest level of religious experience. So for ordinary believers, or you can say for the believers who have not yet reached the level of being mystics or RF, still there can be very strong either moments or hours or sometimes even days of being very much in deep connection with God. But normally for them, this does not last too long, because these are the people that are at the same time very much engaged with day-to-day life, and they have not yet been able to reach a level of unity that would enable them to see everything as an act of God and every quality as a quality of God and every being as a manifestation of God. So since this has not happened to them, they will have moments or hours or days of deep connection with God, but not continuously and not to the level that they can understand many things from the hidden world. For example, imagine a person that is in a deep experience of prayer, especially maybe in, for example, the middle of the night, in some of the recommended prayers, maybe you have this feeling, or sometimes maybe even obligated, that you feel that the conversation with God in prayer turns into a different experience, as if the door is open to you. Imagine you are behind the gate and there's a need for a password to say, and then the gate opens for you. So we have the password, and that's the prayer, but the password doesn't work all the time because we say it by mind, we say it by tongue. But if we say this password by heart, then the gate is opened. This is why we have many hadiths that presence of heart is a very important condition for acceptance of prayer. Our scholars distinguish between validity of prayer and acceptability of prayer. If you perform your daily prayer, your ritual prayers with the conditions which are introduced in jurisprudence, your prayer is valid. You don't need to repeat it. You will not be questioned by God why you didn't say your prayer, but it would not be necessarily accepted. This is a totally different thing. Acceptance of prayer means you must have religious experience. Acceptance of prayer means that your heart must be present during the prayer, which means that the password is said by heart so that the gate to the kingdom of God is opened. And this is the only time that your prayer can be ascension. We say, as-salatu mi'rajul mu'min. Prayer is ascension for a believer. But not every believer who says his prayer or her prayer would be able to ascend. Some people would say the prayers and they don't even ascend for an inch. But we are supposed to say it in the way that we can ascend to heaven. And if God forbid outside prayer, we did something that we came down, we descended, then again we have tried to go high. So this is a kind of religious experience that we are expected to have in every time that we are making our prayer. And without this, our prayer is not accepted. And our prayer is not going to help us spiritually. We have just fulfilled an obligation, but not without benefiting from it. Or, for example, outside ritual prayers, when we are supplicating to God, when making dua, not salat only, we make dua. Here also, we should make our dua with a heart which is present, and we should make our dua with humility and with maximum hope. If you are doing your dua with humility and hope, these two will make sure that you are in a spiritual mode. You are not in just a physical or mental mode. You are in a spiritual mode. And you can connect to God. Many times people actually maybe find it more easy to make their connection when they are supplicating, for example, Du'a Kumail or Du'a Arafah, because the whole setting and the presence of other believers and the atmosphere of the day, and if they are lucky, if they are in a holy place, maybe all contribute to feel even more connected than their daily prayers. This is not have to be the case, but many people maybe experience it like this. So if you ask them throughout the year, what were some of your most important religious experiences? Maybe they say, when I was reciting Du'a Arafah, or when I was in the shrine and we were reciting Du'a Kumail, for example, or Du'a Tawassul. Sometimes this happens during the pilgrimage, because when you are acting as a pilgrim, it means that you have already decided to pause your worldly engagements for a few days. You have left everything behind and you are on a pilgrimage. So from the time you leave your home, you are making it very clear for yourself that I am on a journey, I've embarked on a spiritual journey. And when you reach the holy shrine, then you are already prepared to have some deep religious experience. And if you don't have it, if you don't feel it, you feel something is missing, something is wrong. This has to be the case with every ritual prayer, but unfortunately, maybe we don't, expect it like that. But when we go for pilgrimage, when we go to Mecca or we go to the shrines of the Prophet and Imams, we would certainly prepare ourselves and expect that something very spiritual must be experienced by us. So for believers who are trying to live by religion, but still they have not made great success and they have not reached the point of certainty, or they have not achieved hayat tayyibah, at least these experiences are available in addition to some personal moments. When people, for example, receive the sad news of demise of a dear one, they become very spiritual. Or some people, maybe less, but this is also possible when they have very good experience of success, or they receive the good news of, for example, being given a child, etc. Maybe they become very spiritual. But it's not very continuous. The second group are the people who have lived a spiritual life. They have been consistent, almost consistent, although maybe sometimes they were not, at very high mode, but overall they were consistent. They have worked for their spirituality and piety. They have tried to do everything with presence of heart and with sincere intention. And they have been doing muraqabah. They have been monitoring themselves. So for them, what happens is that there will be flashes of light. And these flashes of light gradually become more frequent and more lasting till it becomes continuous. I would like to refer to what Imam Ali alayhi salam has said about such people. For example, in Sermon 218 of Nahjul Balagha, Imam Ali says, قَدْ أَحْيَا عَقْلَهُ وَأَمَاتَ نَفْسَهُ. He talks about the people who have revived their intellect. This needs explanation. What does it mean to revive the intellect? To make it short, when you don't act according to the instructions of your intellect, it's a sign of killing your intellect. When intellect is not used, is not trusted, is not followed, you are weakening and finally almost killing your intellect. But when you try to reflect, to think, to accept with reason, to reject with reason, to give reason the chance to reflect, to correct, to prove, then you are strengthening and reviving your intellect. And this means وَأَمَاتَ نَفْسَهُ. And then this means that you are getting rid of nafsa ammare, the soul which is uneducated, the soul which is not purified, the soul which is commanding just to do bad things. That soul is now destroyed. And you have moved to a different level of soul, which is nafs al-lawwame and then nafs al-mutmainna. So Imam Ali says this person or such people are the people who have revived their intellect. They have got rid of their nafs ammare, hatta daqqa jaliluh wa latufa qaliduh, to the extent that they become very soft. There is no trace of harshness and hard-heartedness. They have become very soft, very gentle, very sensitive. This is what we need. Many artists, many poets, they have soft heart. People who have wisdom, they have soft heart. And this is why their emotions become strong. But emotions should be originating from intellect. Otherwise, they are not a sign of progress. So when they have become so sensitive, so soft, so gentle, then what happens is وَبَرَقَ لَهُمْ لَامِعٌ كَثِيرُ الْبَرْقِ. Imam Ali says, then there would be a flash of light which has lots of light. It illuminates. It's not the light that you can experience by anything other than connection with God. Certainly, this is not a physical light. And this is not even the light of understanding a good point. This is not the light of, for example, knowing something useful. This is of a different caliber, different level. And this light, which is projected by God on such people, shows the way towards the absolute light, which is God. So if you follow light, light by itself tells you where I am coming from. And you just need to follow this light. فَأَبَانَ لَهُ الطَّرِيقِ. Then this light illuminates the path. وَسَلَّكَ بِهِ السَّبِيلِ. Not only this light shows the path, but also takes you with itself. So it's a light, and at the same time, it's an engine. It's a vehicle that takes you. Because you become light. With the help of light, then it's very difficult to move. Sorry, very easy to move and very difficult to stay. وَتَدَافَعَتْهُ الْأَبْوَابِ إِلَى بَابِ السَّلَامَةِ وَدَارِ الْإِقَامَةِ. Then they go through one gate after another gate, one gate after another. Imagine if you want to see the king, by the time you enter palace and then you reach the king, maybe there are 10 doors, maybe 20 doors. And every door has its own checkpoints, and there are guards who check whether you can go the next step or not. So they will go through these gates till they reach the last or close to the last, at this gate of peace. Salam, gate of safety. Badar al-Iqama. That is where you can stay. There is no further, journey needed. Yes, inside that realm also there can be journey, but you don't need to go to another realm. Your journey continues in the same realm. وَثَبَتَتْ رِجْلَاهُ بِطُمَأْنِينَةِ بَدَنِهِ فِي قَرَارِ الْأَمْنِ وَالرَّاحَةِ. Then his legs will have firm position in this abode of safety and comfort. How important is peace in Quran, in this Islam, that we call heaven abode of peace, Darus Salam. And Quran shows us the ways of peace, Subul as-Salam. How he has achieved this, if we want to summarize it, بِمَا اسْتَعْمَلَ قَلْبَهُ وَأَرْضَى رَبَّهُ. Because he has used and utilized his heart and pleased his Lord. Unless you utilize your heart, you cannot make this journey. So this is deep religious experience. It's not just something of knowledge or doctrines or something of rituals. Is something that affects the heart, transforms the heart, and then the heart will take over. So you present it to the heart, and when heart welcomes it, then the heart will be in charge, and the rest of journey will be directed by heart with the light of intellect and revelation. In another place, that there are people who are very closely connected with God. And maybe this takes us to the third level, and that is about the prophets, about imams, infallible imams, who are hujjah of Allah, who are people through whom we can understand will of God. In Shia Islam, our dear friends might be familiar that in Shia Islam, we believe that there are two types of hujjah. One is external, and that is the prophets and messengers and imams who are infallible. And one is internal, which is intellect. We believe in harmony between intellect or reason and revelation as given by us, shared by them to us, and also after them without receiving revelation, but our imams continue infallible teaching. Anyway, Imam Ali alayhi salam says that there are people that these people are very deeply connected with God. They are not a lot in number. He says, "Ulaika wallahi al-aqalluna adada." By God, they are very small in number. Maybe in every era, only few people. But they are always there. وَالْأَعْظَمُونَ قَدْرًا. But their level is very high. Their status is very high. They are very highly regarded, although in number they are not. So in quantity, there are not many of them, but in quality, they are very high. These people receive knowledge from God without any doubt, without any confusion. They have certainty. And you know, the Quran says, if you have certainty, you can even see the hell right now. Because heaven and hell are there, we cannot just see them. The veil will be removed. The Quran says, كَلَّا لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عِلْمَ الْيَقِينِ لَتَرَبُنَّ الْجَحِيمِ. If you had knowledge of certainty, if you had certain knowledge, you would have seen the hell. ثُمَّ لَتَرَبُنَّهَا عَيْنًا بِعَيْنِ الْيَقِينِ. It's a higher level of yaqeen, that is like seeing, of course, with the eye of the heart, you would see the hell. So these people have certainty, no doubt, no confusion, and they receive knowledge from God, and then they pass it on to people similar to them, not through teaching, not through giving a piece of paper. Here, the transfer of this kind of knowledge is through a spirit to spirit, heart to heart. It's not through a person's mind to paper and some lectures and then the other person. That's different. And therefore, they make home for their knowledge in the hearts of the next generation. يَزْرَعُوهَا فِي قُلُوبِ أَشْبَاهِهِمْ. They plant it in the hearts of people who are similar to them. And then Imam says, حَجَمَ بِهِمُ الْعِلْمِ عَلَى حَقِيقَةِ الْبَصِيرَةِ. These are the people that knowledge comes towards them with true insight in an overwhelming way. There is hujum, like attack, but it's a nice attack. Knowledge is showering on them, poured on them. But this knowledge is not theoretical knowledge that sometimes you cannot digest, you cannot understand, you can be confused, you can be overwhelmed. No, this knowledge comes with clarity and brings insight. وَبَاشَرُوا رُوحَ الْيَقِينِ. They have touched the soul or the spirit of certainty. And what people who are only used to material life find it difficult, they find it very easy and comforting. وَاسْتَلَانُوا مَسْتَوْعَرَ الْمُتْرَفُونَ وَأَنَسُوا بَمَا اسْتَوْحَشَ مِنْهُ الْجَاهِلُونَ. What ignorant people or irrational people find it to be very, difficult experience, and they feel lonely, they feel disconnected. These people are very used to it, and they're very much enjoying it. For such people to be alone is a blessing. not all the time, but you enjoy being with people, you enjoy also being alone. وَصَاحِبُ الدُّنْيَا بِأَبْدَانٍ أَرْوَاحُهَا مُعَلَّقَةٌ بِالْمَحَلِّ الْأَعْلَى. These people are with their bodies in this world, among people, walking on the street, going to market, going to the school, going to university, with the same body, with the same physical experiences, but they are not stuck there. This is not end of their engagement. Their souls are at the same time tied to the highest realm. بأبدان أرواحها معلقة بالمحل الأعلى. Then Imam Ali says, Ya Kumail. Imam was talking to Kumail ibn Ziyad al-Nakha'i. And Imam said, Oh Kumail, these are the caliphs, the vicegerents of God on the earth. These are the people who call others towards religion, not the. And he says, shawqan ila ru'yatihim. How eager I am to meet them. And then this at peak of it, at highest level, is for the prophets and messengers who receive revelation. But according to the Quran, revelation is not a matter of some information. It's not a matter of hearing something. It's not a matter of learning something ordinary. It's a matter of heart seeing. ما كذب الفؤاد ما رأى or أفتمارونه على ما يرى or ما ذاق البصر وما طغى. All is about seeing by heart. And this is then what in philosophical language can be referred to as knowledge by presence. And this is the type of knowledge which is not only reliable, but it is actually more powerful than any argument, than any demonstration, any deduction in logical sense. Because this is where what is known is present for you. This is where a prophet or an imam can see the reality in connection, in presence before the reality. I think my time is over. I hope I try to at least a little bit clarify the topic from a Muslim perspective. Thank you very much for your patience. All praise is due to God. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shomali, for your insightful presentation. Well, now it's a time for the question and answer session. You are encouraged to put your hands up, and I will select as soon as I see that. Priority will be given to those who are going to speak, because you have quite many of you, and I don't have the time to look at all the questions written down. So I got Dr. Paya, as usual. Dr. Paya is always the first to set the hand. Please, Dr. Paya, go ahead.
Thank you so much. My thanks to all our three presenters. They illuminated us all. I learned many things from them. But as usual, I'm going to be a bit critical, if they don't mind, our respected guests. My first question is for Professor Leaman. You said in your presentation that Jewish people do not have religious experiences. So that surprised me to some extent, because it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that you're implying that religious experiences are something which people can plan in advance and then follow some sort of algorithmic set of instructions, and then reach a stage in which they will be able to have that experience. But this seems to be some sort of, if you like, unusual definition of religious experience, if this was what you had in mind. In my view, religious experiences just happen to people who have been going through some sort of rituals, some sort of intense and enhanced practices. As Dr. Shomali mentioned at the end, they should have practical activities. So my question to you is, don't you think that religious experiences happen to Jewish, even though they may not be outspoken about it? So this is a question for you. For our second speaker, Professor Huebner, you quoted as a nice saying from Rumi, suggesting that God does 100 wonderful things every moment. And I tend to agree with you. But are you implying that whatever happens in universe is can be interpreted as some sort of religious experience as long as we get connected to it? And if this is the case, then would you also suggest that there are two types of religious experiences? One which is personal, and the other one which is collective. And let me give you an example for the collective religious experience. But again, please correct me if I'm wrong. Do you think that, for example, what is happening in our environment as a result of a very greedy capitalistic regime, which is being imposed upon us all, this is something which we are experiencing together and we are producing together. So would you call this some sort of religious experience in the negative sense, i.e. God is warning us? So this is my question to you. And my question to Professor Shomali is, you mentioned that the result of a genuine religious experience would be knowledge by presence. I guess knowledge by presence is a misnomer, because when you are united with reality, something which happens at the apex of a genuine religious experience, then you are no longer there. There is no subject there to seek ideas, knowledge, and so on and so forth. There is no epistemic distance between the knower and the known. They are part and parcel of reality at large, and the experiencer is going with the flow. Only when the experience ends and he comes back to himself or herself, it would be possible for him or her to reconstruct what he or she had experienced. So what unfortunately misleadingly has been termed as knowledge by presence, ilm huzuri, is actually no knowledge at all. It is a very intense ontological state. When that ontological state comes to an end, then we enter into the epistemic realm, and then, of course, we reconstruct our experience by means of concepts, categories, language, and our memory. So your clarification, please. These are my questions for our three presenters. Thank you.
Right.
Right.
Dr. Leaman, yes.
And so let me just very quickly respond and say, I don't think I claim that Jews don't have religious experiences. I think I claim that it wasn't something that's much talked about. It's not emphasized. It's not something they try to achieve on the whole. Of course, they have them, but you know, it's not something that's really as seen as something you should try and aim at, you know. And so, if it arises, it arises as a byproduct of prayer, following the law, doing the things you're supposed to do. And with that, I will finish and let Harry respond to the second question.
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. Am I on, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you are on.
Okay, good. Thank you for your question. You referred to my quote and comment from the Sufi mystic Rumi. Something like each moment in life contains a myriad of divine activities, and does that imply that the universe is everything that happens in the universe is religious experience? My answer to that would be no. What I was speaking about there was not what is happening as we do our actions, but rather what God is doing in the world is creating doing activities that we can or cannot behold. And insofar as the activities of God are myriad, that doesn't mean that everything that we see around us is. We can participate as individuals or as communities, can participate in opening ourselves to seeing or training ourselves to seeing what God is doing. And that then becomes a religious experience, but not that everything that is happening, in fact, is of God. You talked about two types of personal and collective types of religious experience. Yes, I do think there certainly are collective religious experiences, as in the Christian world, particularly worship or participating in together with other Christians in opening ourselves to the experience of the divine, and then of course personal as well. On the negative side, what can we talk about a negative religious experience? I'm not sure at all about what that might look like, so I'm just going to pass on that.
Wow. Dr. Shomali.
Thank you very much for your question. So knowledge by presence, or ilm huluri, doesn't have to be between you and something else. It can be knowledge about yourself. And when you have knowledge by presence, it means that there is no conceptual knowledge. There is no usage of concepts. Even when you say, I exist, this is not knowledge by presence. If you say, I am happy, or even you formulate it in your mind without saying, it's not knowledge by presence. Knowledge by presence is a kind of recognition of something which is present directly and immediately for you. It can be yourself. It can be your own deep experiences. And it can be for mystics, their creator, their cause. Although to some extent, maybe other people also experience, but not very clearly, so that they realize it's God. Then when you try to articulate it, then mistakes can happen. It very much depends on how good you are in articulating it. Yes, maybe if we reach what mystics call complete self-annihilation, then you will not even notice yourself and your knowledge. It doesn't mean that you don't have knowledge, because even at that time you have presence of God, and God has knowledge of himself and his people and his creatures, but maybe you are not in a mode to articulate it. Otherwise, knowledge by presence is even there, because even God has knowledge by presence of himself. But not everyone reaches the level of complete self-annihilation. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I think the next ends up was Hafid. Can you introduce yourself and please ask your question.
Okay, Hafiz Rawahi from Oman, and I thank you very much, for this very nice conversation. I have two questions, one for Dr. Hari and the other one for Dr. Shomali. So for Dr. Hari, you talk about theological exclusivity is epistemological violence. Why is that? Because we can have theological exclusivity to preserve faith, but we can engage with each other ethically. So we can have ethical pluralism. So this is a question for Dr. Hari. And for Dr. Shomali, I really like your presentation. Can we say, if I make a reference of Hadith of Jibril, which describe what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan. And the definition of Ihsan, it says, worship God as if you see him, and if you don't see him, he sees you. Can we use this as a, is a way to create experience, to create religious experience? And if we take worshiping is not only devotional acts, but everything that that you do, if you do it with awareness that God is seeing you, can we say this? We're creating religious experience here. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much for your question. The notion of epistemological violence is a complex one, and one could easily write a lot about that to unpack that. What I was trying to identify was that there is a way of making one's claims in such a way that it excludes openness to their counterparts or other claims. And that's a problem. That is not to make the claim that every view, every knowledge claim is equally valid. That's a very different claim. And so it does not lead to sort of ethical pluralism or anything like that. But it does mean that if there are differences, those differences need to be respected and engaged with empathetically rather than dismissively. It is not to say that you do not believe your own claim. Of course you do. But there's different postures for how one makes one's claim to know. And that's the point that I wanted to make on that.
Thank
Yes,
you.
I think. Dr. Shomali, yours.
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, it would certainly help for preparation and for being able to have real spiritual experience, that when at the times of worship, and then it should be extended to whole your day and night, you act as if you see God. And if you don't see God, you know at least that he is seeing you. So whether you can sense, can feel that God is in front of you so that you see him, or at least you are sure that God is seeing you, even if you are not able to connect, it puts you in a very alert and in a very vigilant condition. We need to be alert. We need to be always mindful about presence of God, so that in our acts of worship and in hopefully rest of our day, we can be feeling connected with God. God. So religious experience very much needs this and benefits from this kind of approach, that either I am able to see God, or at least I'm aware that he can see me. As the Quran also says, doesn't man know that God is seeing him? Alam ya'lam bi'anna Allah yarah. So all the time we should have this. This also helps us with not being despaired, not be too sad, because I know God is with me and God is watching me. When Moses was worried about the reaction of Pharaoh, and he would, maybe get so angry that he would, kill them and stop the mission at the very beginning, God said, go to Pharaoh and I will be with you. إنني معكما أسمع وأرى. I will be hearing you and I will be seeing you. So when you see God is seeing you and hearing you, you should feel very comfortable. You are not alone. And God, with all the love that he has, would not just watch us and say, okay, I'm watching them, but I don't do anything. Then you have hope that whenever is needed and whenever is wise, God can intervene. Otherwise, this was not going to work for Moses. And God says, I'm watching you and I am, hearing you, but I don't do anything. No, certainly when he says, I am with you, I am hearing you and watching you, certainly it means that you are not alone and you can rely on my hope, you can rely on my intervention whenever it's wise. You shouldn't expect God, to always get involved, but whenever it's wise, whenever it fits the greater wisdom of God, he would certainly intervene. And we don't want God to do something, unwise. We as believers should be happy that whenever is needed and is wise, God would intervene.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. UPL, please introduce yourself and ask the next question.
Dr. Martino, is this this is Ali Azam?
Okay,
I raised my
yes.
hand, so if that's the only hand,
Yeah,
I hope
no,
my questions, yeah.
there was another one, UPL.
Oh,
but I'm not
okay.
sure.
Oh, sorry. So I'll
That's
go.
okay.
I'll
Let's see.
I'll mute myself and I'll come back.
No problem, Ali. Yes,
Okay.
UPL, you are online. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, Hamid Tehrani. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. As far as questions are concerned, first of all, I would like to thank all the three participants for their insightful lectures, presentations. And my question is addressed to Professor Leaman. Professor Leaman, I'm still confused about your assertion that in Judaism, religious experience is not part of their religious practice. Maybe that is true for the really, really Orthodox Jews who are doing their daily worship activities. But, we have heard so much about mystical Judaism. At least I'm sure you would agree that in mystical Judaism, Kabbalah and other things, other traditions, there is that experience. How would you reply to my question? Thank you very much.
Yes, no, you're entirely right. But it's a tiny proportion of Jews who are interested in that. So I didn't think it was worth spending a lot of time talking about them. I mean, it's a tiny minority. It seemed to me that for most Jews, religious experience is not much emphasized. I mean, I'm just reflecting, I hardly ever see discussions of it. Hardly ever see discussions of it. People talk about prayer, of course, and community, doing good things and whatnot, but that I don't think people talk about religious experience. You know, maybe it's because Judaism is is a very old religion. It's it's like if you get married to somebody, you're the first few years you're married to that person, you're very much in love with your wife, and everything's very romantic and whatnot. But after a long time, you settle down into a long relationship in which there isn't a great deal of experiential emotion going on, but there's a lot of duty, ritual, familiar conversations. Perhaps that's why in Judaism, on the whole, there's not a great deal of discussion of religious experience.
By the same token, you could say that about Muslims. The majority of the Muslims or the Orthodox Muslims do their practices, they do their worships, they do their rituals. You could say that about almost any religion.
Sure, I think you can. I think any religion which is based, I think this is what Hegel criticized Judaism and Islam. He thought Christianity was by far the best and the most rational religion, because he said, in Judaism and Islam, all this emphasis on law and God being very far away from them, God not being here on earth like Jesus was supposed to be. That leads to a religion in which you can't really have much experience, Hegel argued. Makes Judaism and Islam, pretty third-rate religions by contrast with Christianity. And perhaps he's got a point. Perhaps he's got a point. Perhaps religions which do have an emphasis on law, as certainly is the case for a lot of Jews, and for quite a few Muslims also, perhaps we don't really emphasize religion experience as much as we ought to, or as much as we could. I mean, I just raised that as a question.
But I think these issues cannot be mutually exclusive. You can have attachment to laws and still have your personal relationship with God.
Of course you can. Of course you can. Of course you can. But, some people would argue, well, with law, it's technical, you have to know a lot of stuff, And I mean, and in Judaism, by contrast with other religions, or many other religions, if you're an observant Jew, the prayers are very, very substantial. You're spending a lot of time praying. And so you have to say the prayers very quickly. And some people argue, people don't really have the opportunity to think about what they're saying so much because they're just doing it. That's often been a criticism. And that doesn't really lead to much scope for experience, religious experience. It's a matter of getting it right rather than having the appropriate feelings. And perhaps that's why there isn't much emphasis on it in Judaism. I mean, that's just my take, of course. I'm sure you'll find many Jews who say, oh, religious experience is crucial in Judaism. It's very important. I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I mean, we got to expect different religions to have different understandings of religious experience. We're all different religions. We're coming from different places. We've got different backgrounds. Of course, we're related, but there are big differences here, and we just got to accept that.
Okay, thank you. Move to the next question by Ali.
Thank you, Dr. Martino. Salams to everyone, and thank you for wonderful presentations. My more comment than a question, I suppose, but maybe both, to Dr. Shomali, and on a pushback on knowledge by presence. So I feel that there is no coherency in all things that are made claim of, including Professor Payas, when he said that the subject is no longer, able to is part of the reality. So he doesn't have. I think he's also supposing a reality, a condition that he's not experienced. So it's very hard to just, have a knowledge claim on something, what happens and what not happens. So there is a, question to Professor Pia's question in itself. But going back, religious experience can be subjective mental state, but to give authenticity and validity to knowledge by presence raises a lot of questions. For one, is it beyond time and space? Is reality beyond time and space? And are you connecting with reality beyond time and space? And obviously, there'll be a lot of issues or questions raised that whether our minds are structured to go beyond time and space. Secondly, is it a neurological process, which Professor Paya has often argued very rightly? In that, then there is no participation of intellect. Can be for intellection, but not intellect as such. So there is a lot of emphasis in Quran and religious discourse and in what Dr. Shomali as well emphasized on the intellect. But then there is no coherence and no connection between the intellect and a neurological state of mind. Whereas on the other hand, so I think this what it does is kind of makes it very elite, the idea of this, state of mind that is only some people attain and what is the value to it. And, the others are, perhaps deprived from it but Quran, on the other hand, is very coherent in every single way. So, for example, unity with God. If I was just to give you an example of Imam Hussein at the day of Karbala, he was surely united with God in unison when he was taking a very deliberated actions, demonstrating patience, demonstrating mercy, demonstrating justice, wisdom. So the idea, what I'm trying to say is that this whole idea about knowledge by presence and this mystical, experiential state of mind, and that being the only way to connect with God, I think one raises a huge question about whether it's outside time and space. In my own hypothesis, it is very much in time and space. It is in time and space in a way that the relation that we have God is only through his attributes of justice, kindness, generosity, bravery, truthfulness. These are all the aspects that we participate in as um, in the presentation. The doctor said that, we participate in love when we love each other. We participating in the love attribute of God. So if you're taking like that, I think then this is a much more other regarding, i.e. a social phenomenon, and i.e. the one that is very epistemic oriented, i.e. the one that is conducive to social justice. So I think that what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of questions and a lot of gaps that maybe perhaps we need to look into it before, rendering something as to be, a super form of worship, one that cannot be even defined and articulated. I'm sorry about my comment on this. I hope is not taken as my audacity, but it's something as as my theological or intellectual thought to put forward.
Yes, there is an underlying question there. Maybe Dr. Shomali
Yeah.
will have to address that.
Thank you very much. I think maybe if we really go in the line that I've presented, there is no need for go to this complication. And I tried to make it very clear that we don't look at religious experience as a proof, neither to prove religion or existence of God by this, or to prove anything for which we have no evidence from the Quran and Sunnah or intellect. Even when it comes to our experiences, to our emotions, I said they should originate from intellect. Even when I said, what Imam Ali said, قَدْ أَحْيَا عَقْلَهُ. But it's a matter of alertness, it's a matter of mindfulness, For example, when I said for your prayer, you have to have presence of heart. This makes prayer a spiritual, not just ritual. This is not complicated. It's very straightforward. Yes, if you want to reach a mystical level of religious experience and to find some facts and some truths which are not available from other sources, this is where we have to be very careful, because then how you interpret it is important, and also it's not valid for other people. This is why we say we need to have mystical experiences verified by philosophical discourse. But for the prophets, although we don't have their experience, but they are already proved to us to be immune from mistakes, and therefore we can benefit from their experiences, but not from any mistake. So I think if we have time and go step by step, we can really understand that there is no kind of need for taking risk about our understanding or saying that, you know, we are just talking about something subjective. It's a variety of and different levels of experiences, and each of them has its own function. But what is common among all these is that religion is not just a matter of just certain beliefs or certain rituals. Religion has certainly to produce some experience at the level of heart, at the level of deep soul. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got a written question here, which has been on board for a while. And this is, thank you from Sarah. Thank you very much to each of you. I have a question for both Professor Harry and Professor Oliver. How do the concept of revelation in divine encounter differs, if at all, in a Jewish and Christian understanding of religious experience, and how do these differences shape their respective practice and beliefs? So both for Oliver and for Harry. Oliver, would you
How
like
long
to
have
start?
you got? How long have you got? I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, it's a huge issue. The thing is, does that encounter continue, or is it limited to the past? And I think in Judaism, a lot of people would see the Bible as having accounts of encounter, but those encounters don't continue after the Bible. What continues after the Bible is law, practice, prayer, things like that. So I'm sure Harry will say something different. Harry.
Yes, go on, Harry. I think you're muted. I'm muted. Okay. Go on.
Oh.
You're still muted.
Unmute.
Okay,
Let's see.
how about now? I don't know, my button isn't working properly, but go ahead. I think we're okay now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I really understood the question, but thank you in any event. Could you repeat the question, please,
Yes.
Mr.
How do the
Moderator?
concept of revelation in divine encounters differ, if at all, in Jewish and Christian understanding of religious experience? And how do these experiences shape their respective practice and beliefs?
Well, the concept of revelation is a deep and difficult concept, but and nevertheless an important one for understanding faith, I think, in general, Christian faith in particular, perhaps. I'm not sure about that. You've noticed that in my presentation, I talked about the concept of religious experience almost entirely in reference to Jesus, the teacher, the one revealed to us. And so we have there in the teachings of Jesus an invitation to experience the faith in a way that will draw us into participating in God's will for this world. And so the assumption is that on that model is that God wills peace, justice, and unity for this world. And we are drawn into that process by the revelation that we find in Jesus Christ. So I'm not sure that that answers the question, but that is my response, and thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. We have another hands up, which is Mustafa. Mustafa, introduce yourself and then ask your question, please.
Hello, everyone. My
Hello.
name is Mustafa. I'm a student at the Islamic College.
Great.
I had an idea that I wanted to share, and I wanted to see what the three gentlemen, what your thoughts on it. What's your take on this idea? So it's this idea of that we are ultimately experiencing the same reality. All of our experiences, we are experiencing the same reality, the same truth. However, we translate it in our own capacity, within our own limits. So there's a beautiful poem in Arabic that goes by, I think that's how it goes. عباراتنا شتى وحسنك واحد وكل إلى ذاك الجمال يشير. So our words are different, but your beauty is the same. And all of our words, all of our expressions points to the same beauty, the same reality. So I just wanted to know what your take on this idea, what your thoughts are on this idea.
Okay, Leaman, you want to go first? Professor Leaman?
Yes, of course. I think it's the same reality. God is the same reality for all of us, and we have different experiences, whether inside each tradition or between traditions. But the interesting point is that those who are more spiritual, those who are more committed to a spiritual understanding of religion or spiritual experience of religion, they become closer to each other. So I think if you compare, for example, Muslim jurists and Jewish jurists, or for example, Muslim theologians, Christian theologians, Jewish theologians, etc., they maybe find it not as easy as Muslim mystics and Jewish mystics and Christian mystics to understand each other. So the more we move towards a spiritual and mystical approach to that ultimate reality, the closer we become, and the language becomes very similar. Even sometimes you don't feel this, for example, mystic could be a Muslim, could be a Christian. If they just talk about, or maybe Jewish, if they just talk about their mysticism, maybe from some references to Quran or Bible, we can understand. Otherwise, the whole idea is very close. It's just a matter of different ways to articulate, different ways to arrive at that point, maybe different depths, but not different reality. I think those who go closer to God, despite their faith background, they will have very similar experiences that I'm not talking about intensity. I was talking about the type of experiences.
I entirely agree.
Harry?
I agree as well, although I might add that experiencing reality is not a simple matter. And we do use different words, but we intend to point to the same reality. But I think there may very well be a process of engagement necessary and important, of empathetic engagement with people who use different words for us to be able to understand the reality towards which our words point. And so that's the only comment I would make, but otherwise I agree with Dr. Shomali.
Great, that's good. Right, I've got another hand up. It's Dr. Jahangir. Yes, your microphone is yours.
Yeah, thank
Introduce
you very much.
yourself.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much, all three
Alaikum
presenters.
salam.
Very much benefited from all presentations. So this is a general question to all three presenters. I would appreciate if I can have the comment from all of you. So related to Mustafa's question, so if the religious experience is more of a universal experience and not tradition and religion specific, are there some ways that we can trace back the universality of at least these Abrahamic religious experiences to Abraham himself? This is number one. So I don't know if in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, are there some signs that we can say these are some of the references that at least part of these religious experiences are rooted in the tradition of Abraham or in the lifestyle of Abraham? So this is number one. And number two, about the authenticity. Again, are there some common ways based on which the authenticity and validity of religious experiences can be verified? Yeah, so these two questions. Thank you.
Right, okay. Anybody wants to ask first? Dr. Leaman, perhaps you can
Yeah,
ask
okay,
first.
let me make a comment, and then I'll have to apologize because I've got to go and put my children to bed.
Sure,
Okay, so
sure.
yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, looking at Abraham, something common in Abraham, and after all, the Abrahamic religions. Why not? I think the second question was more, for me, more interesting, and I think the interesting question here would be to ask: suppose the religious experience that's described in Scripture never actually took place, would it invalidate the Scripture? Because some people would argue what was important there were the ideas that Abraham had when he was looking at the sun, and the ideas of Abraham when he was arguing with God in the Bible about what's going to happen to the inhabitants of the sinful cities. It didn't really matter if that experience took place or not. What's important is the ideas and what those ideas mean. And that, I think, is why in Judaism, religious experiences are not that much emphasized. And I'm afraid I do have to apologize, and it was very nice chatting to you guys, and I hope do carry on with the discussion, and I do apologize for having to leave. Bye.
No worries. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you. Right. Okay, no problem. Okay, Dr. Shomali, you want to add something to your own to that?
Thanks to Dr. Jahangir for his question. I think what is very important in all our traditions is the type of understanding that Abraham had of God. Maybe we are not closely aware of, what was his legacy, but What is important, we share the same understanding of God that Abraham had, a personal God with whom you can have very close relation, with whom you can pray, you can talk. And of course, Abraham reached the point that God showed him his kingdom, as the Quran says. God showed him how to revive the dead. We, at the peak of mystical experience, also expect to reach the point that we can see the kingdom of God, we can have control over many things that in Shia and some Sufi mysticism, we talk about Walaya Takwiniya, a kind of generative, existential guardianship. So these are things that we have inherited from Abraham, although it's not that Abraham was the first person. Abraham himself inherited from others, but he was the person that, according to Quran, reached the point that he passed all the tests and reached a peak. Maybe not every prophet or messenger reached that high level of, being close to God. God chose Abraham as his friend and made him an imam. إِنِّي جَعَلُكَ لِلنَّاسِ إِمَامًا. So we are all, whether we know or not, whether we recognize or not, we are all in deep debt to Abraham. And forever we are shaped and marked by his legacy. And Abraham can be a perfect meeting point also between Islam and Christianity and Judaism.
Yes.
Just
Harry, it's your turn.
Just an additional comment. There's this. Thank you for that question. There is a sense, however, that the two comments about can we root our faiths in Abraham, which of course we have and we are, and the authenticity question, there's a sense in which those two comments are in tension, because it strikes me that rooting, like Abraham was our father, our model of faith in so many different ways. And one of the basic ones was in his openness to God. I mean, he was willing to sacrifice, to leave his surroundings and follow a God whom he did not know where he was being taken. So this openness to God was very profound with respect to who Abraham was and what his faith was. Well, when we model ourselves to that openness, then authenticity and the criteria of authenticity of how we have a religious experience is really not the key issue. The key issue, are we open to having experiences perhaps that Abraham never had in radical openness? But anyway, I agree very much with Dr. Shomali's comments on this as well. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think with this comment, we actually have come to an end. We have gone well over our allocated time. And so there's nothing else for us but to thank your participation, to those who have joined these discussions. And of course, a great thank you to our speakers who have given us time and of course, the knowledge of their experiences. Remember that Islamic College has a monthly lecture. So if you are the first time participant, remember, have a look at our Islamic College website where we announce every month our lectures. So and do join our mailing list as well, but just sending us an email. So if I know there are some of you who had left some questions, but as I said, our time is come to an end. Again, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you in the next meeting. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shomali. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Huebner.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amir. Thank you.
You.